This is Chapter 6, Building on Client Strengths and Successes. So in the previous video, we left off with introducing the miracle question, and I gave you a very generic explanation of the miracle question, without actually demonstrating how it would be used in practice. So we're going to kind of take where that left off and build on it just a tiny bit further. So keep that in mind as we go through this chapter. Wanted to start by first reviewing a quote at the beginning of the book, beginning of this chapter rather, on page 109. When I focus on what's good today, I have a good day. And when I focus on what is bad, I have a bad day. If I focus on a problem, the problem increases. If I focus on the answer increases. So I feel as though this sums up CBT therapy in a nutshell. And also, it applies to solution-focused therapy as well. But I wanted to kind of highlight this and really kind of get into detail on it, because I feel as though if we keep instilling positive into our clients, it becomes a learned behavior. And in CBT therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, what you're doing is you're reconstructing thoughts. So you're reconstructing a thought that you may have and kind of changing it to whatever it is that the desired outcome is. And I feel in this case scenario, as we've mentioned several times throughout this course so far, you want to build on the client's strengths, build on their successes, build on the positive, focus on solutions, and empower your clients. And I feel that this quote is such an accurate representation of what our goal is and what we're trying to do. And I think it's well said by saying that, if you focus on what's good, you're going to have a good day. I truly believe in a snowball effect, whether it's a good snowball or a bad snowball. So if you have a good snowball, even if you take a moment and think about a time that happened in your life where something good happened and you were in a really great mood, like maybe you won on a scratch off lottery ticket or something like that. And, okay, well, I'm going to play another one. And then something else good happens to you that day. It just kind of is a chain of events. And I think what is actually happening is you're just focusing in on that positive part. You're not really focusing on the negatives that might have happened during that day. So you still may have stubbed your toe on the same day, but you don't really notice that as much because you had a good chain of events that happened in that same day. This very same example could happen in a negative snowball. So, you could wake up and, you slept through your alarms. Now you're late for work. Now you're off your groove and, your boss is mad at you. And again, a chain of events happens. A snowball effect happens. So you only focus on the negative. But in that negative day, something good may have happened. Like maybe your coworker brought you lunch that day or something. But you don't notice that because you're just focused on the negative. So I feel that this quote is a really good representation of how, when we are working with our clients, we can shift their focus from problem talk and keep it on solution talk. And same as if you're incorporating a little bit of CBT therapy with it too, is you're changing and reconstructing their thought process. If they have this good thought about something, it's more likely to kind of increase more positive thoughts. So I know I went off a little bit on a tangent here, but I really, 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 really like that quote. And I really wanted to kind of emphasize that for you guys so that you can kind of get an idea of the importance of the work that we are doing with our clients. So back to building on client strengths and successes, and back to the miracle question. There are two main steps in finding out what the person wants when you're working with them: the what and the how. So let's look at the what for a second. The what will be different when the miracle happens. This is creating goals. The how is the best way to get there. And it's the exceptions to the problem. It's the strategy that you're going to use to implement your solution. Can talking about problems be helpful? Yes, we've talked about that before. You might want to give your client 5 to 10 minutes in the beginning. Let them vent, let them get it out, and then you can focus on solution. Now, if you're a couple sessions in, or maybe, you're past your 10-minute mark and they keep going back to the problem talk, that's when you want to kind of bring them back and say, okay, maybe not even acknowledge it, but you want to just guide them into solution talk. So yes, talking about problems can be helpful, especially for venting or temporary relief, but it's not the end game. you want to definitely focus on solutions. But I wanted to clarify that may or may not be a quiz question too. All right, so let's talk a little bit about exceptions. We've talked about goals. Let's move on to exceptions, our strategy. What are exceptions? They are experiences when the problem should have occurred but did not occur. So example, maybe the times that they didn't fight with their significant other, or times that their child didn't run away, or that you didn't feel stressed out, or when something was less bad. Any teeny tiny step that is something like their miracle, that is our exceptions. So when you are interviewing for exceptions, there's a few things that you can, ask your client. The first is ask, have there been times in the last week or weeks, recent past only, when the problem did not happen or was less severe? So after you've already asked your miracle question, you want to say, in the last week, was there any times when parts of this miracle may have happened? Kind of build off of that. The second way to interview for exceptions is relationship questions. We're back to that again. If they can't answer, suppose I asked your best friend, your wife, your kid, your mother, your brother, whether you had any better days or times recently, what would they say? Incorporating those people that are important. Third, details. We want to get the details. If they identify an exception, ask for details. How does this time differ from other problem times? Play detective, curiosity. Who, what, when, where are the exceptions? Exception time or times. Explore with them. Next, you want to feed it back. Notice what is different between the problem times and the solution times, and paraphrase or summarize it back to the person so that they can see or hear it how you're getting it from them. Next, we have the how. How is finding out what made the exception happen now. What made the exception happen and how it happened. Two possibilities. So a deliberate exception may have happened. So my example was a husband whose wife finally talked to him, says, I decided to wait till she decompressed from work until I asked her to talk to me. A random exception might be, I have no idea. It must be the phase of the moon, or he hasn't talked with me after work like he did this week since I don't know when. So either it happened because that person had a role in it, or maybe it just happened and we don't know what the reason was behind it happening. So those are the two hows that could happen. Record whichever one it is, whether it's deliberate or not, because you could use that in the end of session feedback when you're figuring out what the next strategy will be for your client. Going back to Ayan for a moment, Ayan's exceptions. Suggest exploring for exceptions after asking the miracle question. It's a natural transition, and it increases the chances that the person will give exceptions related to the miracle and to what they want to have happen. There's benefits to successful exception interviewing also. It increases a person's hope. It makes them more interested in solution building, and it builds on people's strengths. They're uncovered and identified through solution building, which gives you things that you can kind of praise or compliment them on, whether directly or indirectly too. And remember, use the person's frame of reference. Use their words. Can't emphasize that enough. Very, 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 very important. The next skill that this chapter talks about that is important when working with the miracle question is scaling. I had mentioned it briefly a few chapters ago, or a few lecture videos ago rather, and that's the use of the scale of 0 to 10. So we're going to explain that a little bit more for you. So these scaling questions can be used for just about anything, and it doesn't even have to relate to the miracle question. But you could scale for a person's self-esteem, you could scale for a person's hope, desire for change, willingness to work on change, priority of problems to work on, progress towards goals, literally anything. Great questions. And the cool thing about scaling questions too is you can ask follow-up questions when you do it, but I'll get to that. I always get ahead of myself. On page 114 in your book, they talk about pre-session change. That was an example that they used the scaling questions for. So definitely take a look at that. So the definition of scaling is for people looking for help. It's a positive change between making the first appointment and the first meeting. I'm sorry. It was not the definition of scaling question. That was the definition for your pre-session change. For people looking for help, positive change between making the first appointment and the first meeting that they came to you. So what happened in that time frame from making the call to actually showing up? Scale it. 0 equals how bad things were at the time you made the appointment, and 10 is the miracle. What are you today, and what were you on your first session if this isn't the first session that you're working with the person? The author calls this the miracle scale, and that's on pages 115 to 116. The term really isn't important, but what is important is that it can be used to help the person identify exceptions. So what's different about being whatever number they are than being at 0? What makes you whatever number today other than coming here? And anything else that you can kind of build off of with using that number for your pre-session change. So why is scaling helpful? It allows the person to express perceptions in a straight and easy forward way. They don't have to think a lot about what they're saying. They're just worried about a number. They're not really, trying to think of a really good answer that, might please you or please the courts or whatever. And it's a springboard for the professional to explore for exceptions. As some of the questions we've asked before, well, what makes you this number versus that number, and vice versa. And it builds awareness that it is the person and not the professional who is changing, even without the professional. So you're not changing their number, they're changing their number. So why do you think we should scale motivation? We want to know how hard they're willing to work. And it is a positive indicator of change. The higher the score, the more they are willing to try new things, and it usually helps you give the end of session feedback or give them compliments at the end. When we are using scaling questions, it's important to use follow-up questions as well. We've mentioned a few already, but I'm going to go over this a little bit more. So, where does that willingness to work hard come from? So this question often comes from a person's values, which tells you a lot about what's important to them and what they want. Again, we're always looking for what they want. People can define themselves in positive ways with this question. It builds confidence in them, and it leads to end of session feedback or compliments, since it's a strength, and often leads the person to telling you their other strengths as well. And a person frequently identifies exceptions after this question has been asked to them. In your textbook, we have the Williams family. Insoo asks not about when they will achieve their miracle, but if there are times already when little bits of that miracle happens. She ignores problem talk from Gladys and stays on solution, and that's a good example, and that one's on page 119. On that same page, where did you learn that? From her siblings to Aish. And on the top of page 120, so they do listen to you sometimes. So that, again, is exploring for that exception. So I want to try to bring some of the textbook stuff into what we're talking about in this lecture video. Something else important to keep in mind is people tend to minimize exceptions, dismiss them, and return to problem talk. This will happen very often in your sessions. This is expected to happen in your sessions. People we see having overwhelming problems and exceptions don't pop up as being of much use to the person or to us either. But success, when acknowledged and returned to you, feeds on itself, even when the successes might be small. So what do you, as a professional, have to do? Well, first, you don't want to get hooked on problem talk. And that is not easy to do, because if that's what the person keeps going to, it's easy to kind of get into it with them. Second, you want to ask exception-exploring questions, and don't give up, even if they're being resistant with exceptions. Third, listen for exceptions even when the person is minimizing them. Not all the time, not most of the time. Those are some things that might be minimizing that you can kind of, cue in to listen to. And ask about how the exception times are different from or better than problem times. Find out who is doing what to make the exception happen. Who is the leader and who is the follower. Write down the person's strengths and successes that you run across in exception interviewing. Something that, so you could build upon it later in later sessions. Again, don't push for closure too quickly. We all tend to jump to possible solutions. I can't emphasize that enough. Is a solution to go to court and try to get more visitations with my kids? Probably not. What might be better? In an example where, a person is using drugs, but they want to get their kids back, should that be the exception? That's kind of what you want to explore and you want to look for. The person may not come up with the best exceptions right away, so don't jump on the first one. This is new for them, and you told them in the very beginning that this is kind of an unusual question that you're asking them. So they may not have all of the answers, but that's your job, is to kind of explore that with them and help them learn. So 2 other things that I wanted to kind of take note of, it might be okay to take notes during your session too. You could ask the person, or it depends on the situation. I know occasionally I've jotted down a few things, especially when you're working on the miracle question too, because you want to kind of keep mental note of these things. And say, for example, after you finish that session, you jump right into another session. You don't want to lose that valuable information that you have. So it might be okay to take notes during your session. Another one is checking your watch so that you can kind of keep an eye on time. As we mentioned in the introduction to working with your sessions, you say, okay, we're going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then I'm going to give you feedback. Well, you want to kind of keep an eye on the time without really glancing at your watch. I know that in my office, I would strategically place a clock where I could just quickly glance, but still kind of focus in on my client so I could keep an eye on time. Obviously, that's going to depend on your situation too, or your environment that you're working on. But that's an idea to kind of help work or tackle that aspect too. So this was exploring for some exceptions to kind of build on our miracle question. So remember, we start with that miracle, we build on it, and we scale. And all of these different things have endless possibilities of ways that we can kind of keep exploring more, keeping our curiosity going and playing detective. All right, thank you for watching. We'll move on.